In the frozen wilderness of northern Canada, along the silent shores of Anjikuni Lake, an entire Inuit village vanished without a trace. No bodies, no signs of struggle, only empty homes, smoldering fires, and an eerie silence that still haunts the ice. If you are a lover of horror, dark myths, and chilling mysteries from around the world, make sure to subscribe to this channel, because tonight we unravel one of the most disturbing real-life horror stories ever told, the legend of Anjikuni Lake. The story begins in November of 1930. The Northern Territories were locked in darkness, the sun dipping below the horizon for weeks at a time. Anjikuni Lake was an isolated region, surrounded by dense pine forests and vast frozen tundra. To reach it, one had to travel by dog sled for days, across biting winds and endless white silence. This was where an Inuit settlement once thrived. A cluster of small wooden huts stood along the frozen shoreline. Smoke usually curled from their chimneys, a sign of warmth and life amidst the deadly cold. Hunters and fishermen sustained the community, while old stories, tales of spirits, curses, and shapeshifters were whispered round the fire. But by the end of that winter, everything changed. The settlement would soon enter history as one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in Canadian folklore. The discovery. One evening, a fur trapper named Joe LaBelle was making his way toward the village. He was no stranger to these lands. He had traded with the Inuit before and relied on their hospitality in the brutal cold. As he neared the settlement, he noticed something unusual. There was no smoke rising from the chimneys, no barking of dogs, no children's laughter carried by the wind, only silence. When LaBelle entered the village, what he saw chilled him to the bone. The huts stood intact, doors swinging gently in the wind. Pots of stew still rested above smoldering fires, as if dinner had been abandoned mid-bite. Furs and tools were neatly arranged. Rifles hung on the walls. But the people, men, women, children, were gone. Every single one of them. Signs of something darker. LaBelle searched desperately for answers. He found no footprints leading away from the village, except for a few that stretched into the snow but ended abruptly, as if swallowed by the earth or erased by unseen hands. Even the village dogs were discovered dead, still tethered to their posts, starved and frozen in place. Their lifeless bodies were covered by a thin layer of frost, their eyes open wide in terror, reflecting the pale moonlight. But perhaps most disturbing of all, LaBelle swore that the village felt watched. The silence wasn't natural, it was oppressive, suffocating, as if the air itself carried a warning. Some huts had claw-like scratches on the wooden frames, deep gouges, as though something had tried to get inside. LaBelle fled in panic, traveling through the night to the nearest telegraph station. He reported what he found to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and when investigators arrived, they too were left with no answers. For the Inuit, the disappearance was not just a tragedy, but a confirmation of old legends. Elders spoke of the Torngarsuk, a malevolent spirit that wandered the north, punishing villages that broke sacred traditions. Others whispered of the Wendigo, a cannibal spirit of the endless winter, known to lure humans away with whispers on the wind. Hunters claimed that nights before the disappearance, strange lights had been seen above the lake, shimmering blue orbs moving silently through the sky. Some said they were spirits, others believed they were far worse. The official story claimed the villagers migrated to escape the harsh winter. But no Inuit community would abandon food, weapons, and shelter in the middle of the most dangerous season. And so, the legend of Anjikuni Lake was born, a story of emptiness, of silence, and of an entire village swallowed by something the world still cannot explain. But what if the truth lies not in what we see, but in what we hear? Because in the north, many say that if you listen closely on frozen nights, you can still hear them, the cries of the vanished, carried across the ice. Imagine walking into a village where hundreds once lived, only to find steaming food left untouched, rifles still hanging on walls, and dogs frozen to death at their posts, while the people themselves had simply vanished into the ice. The arrival of the Mounties. After Joe LaBelle's frantic report, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police dispatched a small team to investigate. When they arrived days later, the scene confirmed his story. The fires were out by then, but blackened pots still held half-cooked meals. Beds had been slept in but abandoned suddenly. Hunting rifles, essential for survival, remained untouched on the walls. No hunter, no matter how desperate, would leave his weapon behind, and yet every inhabitant was gone. Even more unsettling was the graveyard. Several burial sites had been disturbed. Fresh snow revealed that the graves were not simply dug up by animals. The wooden markers were broken, and the earth was clawed at by something human. The strange lights. Mountie reports mention that locals, Inuit hunters who avoided the village after the incident, spoke of unusual lights in the sky above the lake. Described as blue, glowing orbs that hovered in silence, the lights seemed to watch the settlement before disappearing into the tree line. Some compared them to spirit fires, an omen in Inuit legend that signals death or punishment. Others whispered that they were sky people, a story told in hushed tones around fires about beings who came during the darkest winters to take the living away. Whether superstition or truth, one fact remained. Those who ventured near the lake claimed to hear things that should not exist. The voices beneath the ice. Hunters who passed the lake weeks after the disappearance reported the same thing. Voices, not carried by the wind, but rising from beneath the frozen surface of the lake itself. Low murmurs at first, like a chant, then clearer, like cries of women and children. Sometimes whispers would call the hunters by name. One hunter, terrified, claimed that when he leaned closer to the ice to listen, he saw pale shapes beneath the frozen surface, faces distorted in agony, eyes wide open and mouths open in silent screams. he swore one of them moved. The Inuit elders, when questioned, said the villagers must have broken an ancient taboo. Some believed they had angered Qualupiluit, creatures said to live beneath the ice, waiting to drag children into freezing waters. Others said the Wendigo had come, an insatiable spirit that consumed the souls of the living and left nothing behind but echoes. One chilling account suggested that the villagers had willingly walked into the night, entranced by whispers no one else could hear, as if something had called them, one by one, out into the snow. Psychological theories. Skeptics argued it was mass hysteria, that isolation, starvation, or even ergot poisoning could cause hallucinations. Perhaps the villagers fled together in desperation and froze in the wilderness, their bodies never recovered. But none of these explanations accounted for the eerie order of the village, the disturbed graves, or the voices so many claimed to hear. The investigator's nightmare. One Mountie, recorded in confidential notes years later, admitted he experienced something himself. While standing near the frozen shoreline at dusk, he heard the faint cry of a child. He followed the sound toward the lake, convinced it was a survivor. But the closer he got, the further the sound drifted, always just ahead. When he stopped, the cry turned into a whisper, so close it seemed to come from just behind his ear. Yet when he spun around, nothing stood there but the endless snow. That night, he refused to sleep. The official investigation closed with no answers. The Anjikuni people were declared missing, their fate sealed in silence. But whispers continued to spread, carried through northern camps and down into written folklore. And to this day, hunters and travelers alike swear that if you camp too close to the lake, you'll hear it too. The soft voices in the snow, rising from beneath the ice, calling your name. But in the third and final part, we will uncover the darkest theories behind what really happened and the chilling truth that lies beneath the frozen surface of Anjikuni Lake. What if an entire village didn't vanish but was taken? What if the frozen silence of Anjikuni hides something still alive beneath the ice? The forgotten testimony. For decades, the disappearance of Anjikuni was reduced to folklore. But in 1972, a forgotten diary surfaced in a private collection in Winnipeg. The diary belonged to a missionary who had visited the settlement only weeks before it vanished. He wrote of strange rituals held by the villagers, ceremonies that weren't part of traditional Inuit practices. Nighttime chants near the water's edge, offerings placed on the frozen surface of the lake, and most disturbingly, children singing in voices that didn't sound like their own. The missionary left abruptly, convinced the community was worshipping something that lived beneath the ice. Disturbances at the lake. Modern paranormal investigators who braved Anjikuni report unsettling phenomena. Their equipment fails without warning. Batteries drain instantly. Audio recorders capture faint, layered whispers, sometimes in English, sometimes in dialects no one can identify. One team even claimed they caught the sound of marching, like footsteps of hundreds echoing faintly through the ground. Yet when replayed, the sound seemed to be coming from under the lake. The recordings were later reviewed by sound engineers, who confirmed the frequencies did not match natural environmental noise. The disturbed graves, a darker theory. Why were the graves torn open? Some researchers believe the villagers tried to summon their dead. In Inuit tradition, the boundary between the living and spirits is fragile during the long winter nights. If rituals were performed incorrectly, or if something other than ancestors answered, it could have led to catastrophe. Perhaps what Joe LaBelle stumbled upon was not an abandoned village, but the aftermath of a failed ritual, one that called something ancient and hungry. The whispers revealed. Local hunters have long said the whispers are most audible on nights when the aurora borealis dances across the sky. The voices rise with the shifting lights, weaving together like a choir beneath the ice. Some claim the whispers are pleas for help. Others believe they are lures, calls meant to draw the living closer to the lake. One terrifying story tells of a hunter who followed the voices too far. His companions found his sled, his rifle, even his heavy parka abandoned on the shore. But he himself was gone. Only his footprints remained, leading out onto the frozen lake, and then stopping abruptly, halfway across, as if he had stepped into nothing. Inuit elders say the lake itself is cursed, not by spirits of the dead, but by an ancient being that sleeps beneath the ice, something that feeds not on flesh, but on souls. The villagers of Anjikuni may not have been taken in a physical sense at all. Their bodies might never be found because what was stolen from them was far worse. Their essence, their voices, their very being. And that is why, to this day, travelers still hear them, because the lake holds not just water, but the echoes of those who once lived there. The silence of Anjikuni. The Anjikuni Lake disappearance remains unsolved. Skeptics dismiss it as myth, while believers see it as one of the greatest supernatural tragedies of the 20th century. But one fact cannot be denied. No bodies were ever found, no survivors returned, and no natural explanation has ever been proven. So, if you ever find yourself on the frozen shores of Anjikuni Lake, remember this warning. Do not listen too closely, because the voices that call from the ice are not echoes of the past. They are invitations, waiting for someone new to join them. The voices are still there, whispering, waiting. Can you hear them? If you love horror, dark legends, and chilling mysteries like this, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and tell us in the comments which story you want us to bring to life next. Because the next legend we uncover might just be the one that finds you.